So before we begin, I want to say a big, huge thank you to the folks at the Missouri Birding Society and to Patrice Taylor. They have supported this series and also provided the inspiration and enthusiasm that really kind of made it happen. So thanks very much. I hope some of you are seeing this right now. My name is Dana Ripper. I am the co-founder and co-director of the Missouri River Bird Observatory, along with Ethan Duke, who is also on tonight. As an organization, our mission is the conservation of birds and really all wildlife and their habitats via scientific research and monitoring, education and public outreach, and conservation policy advocacy. We are located in the lovely tiny village of Arrow Rock, Missouri. We do have a visitor center there, and in the spring, summer, and fall, that is open on the weekends, and we hope that you will come visit us at some point. So in thinking about putting together this winter webinar series, we really wanted to provide good information, both just to raise awareness of and enjoyment of our birds and their habitats, but also to really speak of a conservation message. So I don't believe that this is going to be, really big news to folks on here, but our birds and other wildlife are really reaching a tipping point in many cases. Their declines have been so steady and so severe over the last several decades that we're now looking at a situation, you can see here on the State of the Birds report from 2022, where we have quite a lot of species down there in red that have lost at least half of their population just in the last 50 years. And if we continue with business as usual, so to speak, basically with the policy and actions that we're currently operating under, these tipping point species are on a trajectory to lose another 50% of their populations. So this made really big news in 2019 when this study was released. It's essentially a meta-analysis of a wide variety of different long-term data sets, and researchers at Cornell and Audubon and others got together and determined that we've lost about 30% of our birds, almost 3 billion birds, since 1970, when some of these data sets were starting to be collected. This made big news in the mainstream media as well, and I think it raised a lot of awareness for the plight of our birds, because these numbers, I think if you are a wildlife lover and you watch birds, you've probably seen some of these declines, but didn't really know if it was just that you were more observant or if there were shifts that might explain it. But the reality of the situation is that we've actually lost a very large proportion of our avifauna. And this is not just, rare birds that are in maybe remote habitats. These are backyard birds. These are birds as familiar as the Baltimore Oriole. So we've lost, 2 in 5 Baltimore Orioles over the last 50 or so years. This is showing here the breakdown by habitat type across North America and where our bird declines have been the steepest. So you can see there that we've lost about half of our grassland birds over the last 50 years. And, again, very familiar species such as meadowlark. These are birds that a lot of people know, and we've lost about 75% of our meadowlark species. So what is going on and why is this happening? And most importantly, what can we do about it? A colleague of mine, Don Ficken with the International Dark Sky Association, that we work with on some light pollution issues, he mentioned once that it must be kind of hard to study birds and work on the conservation challenges because it's like death by 1,000 cuts. There's a lot of different things going on and they're all sort of coalescing into a situation where we have these steep bird declines. So here are some of them. I'm going to just briefly touch on some of these. Tonight is meant to just be an introduction, not a comprehensive look at all of the conservation challenges that we face. But here are some of the main drivers in our bird decline. So habitat loss, of course, we have increasing environmental toxicity. that is harming human health as well as wildlife health, climate, and a couple other things on the right-hand side there. So we'll see that, birds and other wildlife are kind of living in our waste around the world. There are collisions between birds and windows, which I'm sure most folks have probably seen even on their own home. Cats, and then light pollution. So I'll touch briefly on each of these things. So here in Missouri specifically, we had a very extensive landscape of tallgrass prairie. This is the extent of pre-settlement tallgrass prairie here in the state of Missouri, about 14 million acres. And here's the extent of unplowed existing tallgrass prairie now, so around 60,000 acres. So you can imagine that alone would explain a large amount of why our grassland birds are in such decline. And we saw the meadowlark a little bit earlier, but up there on the upper left is a shrike. After doing grassland bird surveys across the state of Missouri for 10 years now, our own data here at MRBO show a very, very small amount of shrikes. We actually have encountered them less on survey than even prairie chickens, although that's kind of changing. So the bird there on the lower right, the greater prairie chicken, used to exist throughout the tallgrass prairie region of our state. And now we have less than 100, despite the best efforts of our conservation department and partners to maintain this part of the landscape. They simply need more acreage of diverse native prairie than we are able to provide at this point in time. So another Missouri habitat, I'm using the term wetlands quite loosely. This is a flooded bottomland forest that you see here. And this is an emergent marsh. All very, very productive, very high quality environments and ecosystems that provide a lot of services. We'll be hearing about that from one of our speakers. And I'd like to note that this picture right here was taken in Missouri's Boot Heel. And I'm standing on a levee, and I took this picture to the left of a private wetland reserve easement, and then just simply made a quarter turn and took this picture to the right. So this is what the other side of the levee looked like. And it would have previously been emergent marsh and or bottomland forest itself as well. So here in our state, we've lost almost 90% of our wetland habitats. With it has gone or is going some birds such as Bachman's warbler. This is a species that most folks aren't familiar with. It actually went extinct in the 1980s, but not a very well-known resident of bottomland forests. And then you can see on the lower right there, a king rail. And a king rail is a very secretive species, but lots of folks here in Missouri have done a lot of great work on them. And we have very few king rails left here in our state as well. So what are we losing all of this habitat to? And I think folks, when we look around ourselves, some of this becomes pretty obvious just by what we can see every day, right? So for example, what are we losing all this habitat to? A lot of it is to industrial agriculture operations. You can see that graphic there on the left shows the intensiveness basically of corn production. The map for soybeans is very, very similar. And if you look, down in the Ozarks, where soil is not as compatible with industrial ag, we don't have that intensive of production, but where we do have it are in our counties that were previously prairie and or wetland. So some of it, especially in our grasslands, has been converted to monoculture fescue. So really going from a situation where you have an incredibly diverse ecosystem, a prairie, down to a monoculture, one plant. And then, of course, in some of our areas, we have, development and associated lawns. It seems that this is on the change, largely thanks to folks like Doug Tallamy, who are tireless advocates for planting native plants, native landscaping around our residences and businesses. but we still have many tens of thousands of acres of lawn, which is not a particularly ecologically rich system. So just for an example here, we're sitting here coming to you today from Saline County, Missouri, and this is pre-settlement land types in our county. You can see the yellow dots are barren scrub, which is an interesting, if not slightly derogatory term for what's probably, shrub scrub land. You can see the forests in dark green and a lot of prairie. A lot of this right here was all prairie during our pre-settlement times. And this is a recent cropscape map that Ethan made with USDA data. And you can see here that, the large majority of the acreage here in our home county is now corn and soy, a little bit of grass pasture, almost certainly fescue. We have very little unplowed native prairie, if any, left here in Saline County. And so you can see that's a huge change just in this one county. And we're basically providing less and less of an area where birds and other wildlife can live. So we have these huge landscape changes across the state of Missouri, really, across the continent and even globally. Grasslands are the most imperiled ecosystem worldwide. And we've changed a lot of that acreage over to monoculture fescue or to cropping. Now you can see here in the bottom right, that's a pretty diverse farm. And when we've heard many, many stories about Missouri existing as more of a patchwork of these smaller farms with diverse cropping and with pastured animal systems. And some folks remember them as the heyday of northern bobwhite quail in the state of Missouri, because they provided this patchwork of habitat. Well, we're seeing that less and less now, of course. And so we have a very monoculture system with one type of vegetation, as well as, our industrial level concentrated animal feeding operations. So over this time, over the past several decades, we've also changed how we farm in terms of the inputs, in terms of chemical use, and all of that has had consequences for our environmental quality and for wildlife conservation. I wanted to show this. It's just like a little video. I was doing some research on pesticide use and came upon this list. And even after having studied this for quite a while, I was still pretty staggered by the extent of this list and by the extent of agricultural pesticides that are out there. So these are both herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, all. You can see, I'm going to click here. So quite a lot. I was researching imidacloprid, which is an insect neurotoxin. Wanted to show this partially because it's a really good research tool, this particular database. You can look at the amount, the prevalence, the intensity of any of the chemicals on the previous list over years and see how their use has grown or not over time. So, of course, this is logically going to become a problem when we essentially have a war on insects at the agricultural level, but also even at times at our residential levels as well. And so we are often involved in removing insects from our landscapes, and 96% of our birds feed insects to their young. They're a good source of protein. So even birds such as, for example, northern cardinal, very much a seed-eating bird. We see that bird at our feeders, snacking on sunflower seeds. But, even that bird that is largely a seed eater outside of the breeding season will feed their young insect protein. So the effects of insect declines are certainly going to be hurting our birds as well. So making a shift now to a different topic, and folks that are around us here at MRBO a lot know that this is a topic that we work on quite extensively. So it is not just your imagination. There is more and more and more plastic in the world, and we are, globally speaking, really unprepared and really unable to deal with the amount that is being produced. At the time, over the course of this half an hour presentation tonight, we'll have made 30 million more plastic bottles. So it's a problem for our wildlife. We often think about and see pictures from ocean systems, but this is a land-based challenge as well. This great blue heron here was pictured in Knoxville, Tennessee. I think this was in 2005 that Ethan took this picture. So we have a situation where we're really unable to deal with this much waste, and our wildlife are now living in it. I think we've all gotten more familiar with pictures like these. These are albatrosses on a very remote Pacific island. There's been more and more documentation about birds feeding their young plastic bits. And you can see here, this is a clip from the National Wildlife Federation. The bottom says, this albatross carcass was one of scores recently found packed with plastic trash on Midway Island, where the estimate is 99% of birds have some kind of plastic in their stomachs. So Midway Island is a very remote island. So this, our plastic waste is making it all over the world. So there are some serious challenges involved with this particular topic. One is that we're talking about a substance that's ever present in ecosystems. It breaks down into smaller and smaller bits, but does not biodegrade. Its extraction, constituent components, and production are significantly contributing to climate change. So plastic is a substance that's made out of fossil fuels and chemicals. And so its very manufacturing process is significantly contributing greenhouse gases at a time when we can't afford to do that. And then again, something that is made of fossil fuels and chemicals, there are more and more emergent research studies, both in the human health sector and in the wildlife health sector, showing that some of these constituents can be very toxic, especially over time, causing problems with development, with endocrine disruption, and myriad other concerns that flow from those things. And then finally, it's something that has been really, really misrepresented to people for a very long time. And so it's fairly difficult to work on. We have been told that, these items that we have are important for our lifestyle and very convenient, and that they're not in any way harmful, and that we have ways of dealing with waste. And if you take kind of a deeper dive into this topic, you will see that none of that is really the case, and it has become a pretty serious crisis globally. Oops. So again, quite a lot of emerging research. You can see the study on the left was from birds of prey in Central Florida that were brought to a rehab center, and either the birds did not make it and were dead upon arrival at the rehab center, or died within 24 hours. So these researchers studied 63 individuals representing 8 species, and microplastics were found in all of the species and all of the individuals. So again, a really pervasive problem. The graphic there on the right is a report that was just put out by Beyond Plastics, an organization that MRBO is affiliated with. And essentially, as plastic production ramps up, while we are kind of trying to move towards greener sources of energy, right, cleaner energy, plastic production is on track to emit the amount of greenhouse gases as all the coal plants that we currently have in service, and will exceed those within the 2030s. So it's a situation where we have an end of life problem, but we also have a problem throughout the whole life cycle. So this climate is obviously a huge topic. Folks interested in conservation know that it is something that we really need to seriously address. But National Audubon Society data and models show us that about 2/3 of North American birds are going to be at more risk of extinction due to climate change within this century. So it's a problem that, of course, affects all of us. It affects all aspects of human life as well, but all of these things are affecting our wildlife friends in a detrimental fashion also. Okay, we're almost done with the unhappy things, everyone. So those are indirect, if you will, indirect causes of mortality. This graph here is showing us direct causes of mortality. And this was based on a paper that came out of Oklahoma in Scott Loss's lab, who are really the experts on this topic. And this graph was made by Brian Lenz of the American Bird Conservancy. And so you can see that outdoor cats are the biggest cause of direct mortality. This is not true just of birds, but also of, small mammals and herps as well. And you can see that that's followed second by window collisions. So these things are problems that that are visible, that we have ways of addressing, and that are, in comparison to things like climate change and the proliferation of plastic and habitat loss, these are easier to work on more directly. So while these pictures are not painting a pleasant image for us, these are topics that we can work on and really make some headway on behalf of birds. The last thing that I want to mention is light pollution. Again, a lot of emerging research showing how our overuse of artificial light at night is really having a detrimental impact on a variety of species, once again, including ourselves as well. I would direct you to some of the presentations that we have online on this topic, and also I mentioned earlier the International Dark Sky Association. There's a Missouri chapter. It's a great organization that's working globally on the problem of light pollution, and they're a great source of information. So yes, please do check out our YouTube channel. Obviously, every single one of these topics is good for hours and hours of presentations, and some of them are going to be addressed in this series. And others, we have already had some really great guest speakers speaking on these topics. So, okay, I hope that folks will attend as many of these as they possibly can. I feel very, very honored by the speakers that have agreed to host webinars for this series. So really in keeping with our mission, what we hope that folks will get out of these, in some cases, is just a better awareness and more enjoyment of our birds that are around us. And then to become more engaged, maybe take actions and possibly even get involved in advocacy. So some of the things, that I just briefly summarized, some of them can be helped on an individual level, and some of them really take coalitions of folks working together to change the systems and the ways that we do things. So I would like to introduce to you all of our speakers for the next several weeks. Next Monday night, we have Mark McKellar. He is a wildlife biologist and owner of the Backyard Bird Center, which provides some wonderful backyard bird items, but he also provides a lot of educational programs and bird walks in the Kansas City area. So Mark will be talking to us about winter sparrows of Missouri. January 23rd, we have Carol David, the executive director of the Missouri Prairie Foundation. I trust that some folks that are on tonight have probably seen Carol speak before. She is an excellent and knowledgeable advocate for prairies, and she'll be speaking to us about why prairie matters. On January 30th, we have friends from the Conservation Federation of Missouri. Kaina Iman is a contract lobbyist with CFM. And just absolute all-around policy wonk. She's excellent at conveying information. And Zach Morris, who is an ecologist with Mitico and is the current president of the Conservation Federation of Missouri, and they will be speaking to us about just kind of how our Missouri government works and some of the recent bills of conservation importance and relevance. On February 6th, we will have Eric and Joanna Reuter. They are organic farmers at Chert Hollow Farm, and they also have background in ecology and earth science, as well as organic agriculture. And they will be speaking to us about avian flocking phenomenon. So these folks have been studying some of the large flocks that have been occurring in central Missouri and sharing their knowledge with us. And so they'll be speaking of the causes and whether or not these flocking phenomena are to be celebrated or if we should be concerned about them. Then we do not have a session on February 13th. So you can see that is not a typo. We go from the 6th and then we start the second set of the series on the 20th with Ethan Duke, so the co-director here at MRBO, and he's going to be speaking all about owls of the Midwest. February 27th, we have a longtime friend and colleague, Seth Gallagher, coming to us from Colorado. He's the program director for Grasslands in the American West with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and he's going to be telling us all about prairie grouse. On March 6th, we have Frank Nelson, the wetlands biologist with Missouri Department of Conservation. And Frank's going to be talking to us about cycled energy in wetland communities and their ecological services. And I'm really looking forward to this one because Frank has an excellent way of taking very complex ecological information and making it very digestible. On March 13th, we'll hear from Sarah Kendrick. She is now with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She was our state ornithologist here in Missouri, but she's with Fish and Wildlife Service now, and I believe she will just have returned from Costa Rica working on the MODIS tracking project. So that is always a really informative and she delights audiences with her information about this very important hemispheric project. On March 20th, we will hear from Katie and Ray from the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They will be talking to us about the very important topic of pollinator conservation and also landscaping for pollinators, so what we can all do in our own yards. And then finally, we have a guest performance by MRBO's former education coordinator. Paige is now the community conservation coordinator with the Door County Land Trust. So she'll be broadcasting to us from Wisconsin about the 7 simple actions that we can all take to help birds. So that is a good place to end, I think. We have action items with these. Sorry, Eth?
Oh, I'll address some chat comments when you're done.
Okay. So these are ways that we as individuals can take very easy steps within our own lives to help birds. And I want to end with the comment that these graphics right here are also from the folks that provided the meta-analysis about 3 billion birds. You can see these at 3billionbirds.org. And you know, as we saw at the beginning, there are a lot of declines, there are a lot of challenges, but you can also see here that thanks to conservation effort, policy, funding, collaborations, people working together on both public and private lands, we have actually gained in some areas. So some of these changes occurred is like a bit of a cultural shift, and some of them were directly because of good policy being put in place. So there is hope. Conservation does work as long as we engage in it in a very intentional manner. Ethan, did you want to have a comment?
No, like I said, there was a couple people had a couple things in the chat. I don't know if you saw while you were presenting or not. But among them, there was one question about something about the time period of one of the cat predation studies, and somebody wanted to see the resource slide again. I know sometimes we forget to screenshot or take a picture of a particular slide that we want, but the one with the half-page flyer of the lineup, that would be good for people to see again. And then we can probably address the cat thing. I did find one of those papers online about the direct mortality from cats, and so they can look more into those particular studies. But it was a pretty comprehensive meta-analysis on of all the studies that have been done on cat predation. And so the very conservative estimates that they came out with at that time were based on the number of cats that were roaming at that time. And they just extrapolated out what the basic average kill rate was, so which is a lot.
And the time frame is per year.
Yeah. If that's what I didn't know if that was what the question was, but I hope that answers your question. Okay, there's a slide. They say resource slide of your YouTube and your channels. So
I can do that, sure. Let's see. There you go.
Yep.
So it's just at Mo River Bird Obs is our handle on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be curating an album, probably the winter series, so after this webinar series is over, they'll probably be archived out there on YouTube.
Any other questions in the chat, Ethan? It's hard for me to see it with slides up.
I hope I didn't miss any. I'm going to scan back through them. I see some compliments for the lineup. A lot of hellos from all points in the state. And some thanks. That's all we got for the intro.
Yeah, I didn't want to take a huge amount of everyone's time tonight, just sort of, give you a brief background of why we wanted to do this and why we, hope folks will be interested in helping conserve our birds.
What will the average presentation time be?
They're meant to be about 45 minutes plus Q&A, and all of our speakers have expressed that they're happy to stay as long as people have questions, but a little bit longer than this brief intro tonight, but not super long. Very glad to have all of you here.
Yes. It looks like it got out through the Missouri birding community networks, as well as the Master Naturalists did a wonderful job of sharing it out and getting the word out. So thank you all for that.
Folks, one last note, we'll also have follow-up emails. So as Ethan said, once the series is over, they're all going to be collected on a YouTube channel, and you'll get links. And often we end up getting, resources linked from our presenters as well. So we'll send a comprehensive email to everyone.
Well, thanks for sharing with the Master Gardeners too. Awesome.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone. If there are no more questions, we'll let y'all go and look forward to seeing you next week.